Yeah. Okay, great. Welcome, everybody. We have such a wonderful big group today. We have a lot of the regular CEB teacher training folks and then some new friends joining us. So, really looking forward to our time together. Let's begin as we usually do any practice session or teaching session by just taking a minute to settle in and set our intention for our time together. So I'll invite you to just get into a comfortable posture with your back straight if you're sitting up in a chair or on a cushion. You could be also lying down in the supine position, and that's fine as well. If you're sitting up, that straight back invites us to have a alertness, but our body relaxed around it, so we're not tense or tight. And just taking a moment to settle in and check through your body, just moving your attention through the body for a moment to check for any tightness or tension, maybe around the jaw or the forehead, the neck and shoulders. Deliberately relaxing and releasing any tension or constriction. And you might like to release any tension that you find with an out breath, maybe just a deep exhalation, letting go of stress and tension. For some of us, it's morning. For some of you, it might be late in the evening. And then let's round off this initial settling of the body with 3 deep breaths. So 3 deep inhalations and exhalations, those deep diaphragmatic breaths. And then settling with the ordinary respiration wherever you can feel the sensations in your body. It might be full body awareness of breathing, or perhaps the diaphragm, or the lungs expanding and contracting, or the sensation around the nostrils. You might like to use a more localized focus, but just settling with the sensations of the breath for a few moments. And when you notice your attention wandering, getting caught up with a thought or maybe a sound outside, just release the distraction and return to the breath. And now let's just take a moment to set our intention for our time together. We say we always get the most out of any session if we're clear about why we've come. So just taking a moment to reflect, and it may be that you're a regular at our CEB teachers gatherings, that you love to come for a sense of community and some insight into teaching CEB or how to work with your own emotions. It may be that this is your first time joining, since we opened this to people who aren't necessarily CEB teachers, and maybe you came to hear more about the upcoming teacher training or to learn more about how to manage your emotions mindfully. Whatever it may be, just taking a moment to reflect and set your intention for our time together today. And we always try to add an altruistic intention. In addition, thinking that whatever we experience together this morning, this evening, whatever time it is for you, may it bring benefit to others as well, through our own personal transformation or perhaps some insight we can share with others. May our time together be beneficial to others as well.
Thank you, Tenzin.
Thank you all for your practice and for being here. And Eve, you want to start us off?
Sure. Yeah, so really, yeah, wonderful to see so many familiar faces. Hi, everyone. And also wonderful to see, or at least read the names of folks I may not know yet. I'm Eve Ekman. I'm one of the guiding teachers of Cultivating Emotional Balance these last 15 plus years. So that's feels like quite a wonderful satisfaction to have been teaching this long and sharing these ideas throughout many different places, many different contexts. And for those who don't know me, I'm a contemplative social scientist. My work really looks at the intersection of empathy, compassion, meditation, psychedelics, technology, and find myself happily occupied bringing the work of emotional balance and emotional awareness to many different sectors in our world. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about the huge topic of compassion. And the reason I think it's so important, oh, sorry, it's asking me to identify my language. Aha. I'm going to talk about the huge important topic of compassion, and I'm talking about it because it seems to really be coming up time and time again in conversations with the students I get to work with on a regular basis. And how could we possibly have enough compassion for the amount of suffering and difficulty, either within our personal world or within the world that we are seeing around us? There are, as we know, myriad wars and areas of difficulty, strife. And then there are, within different societies and cultures, areas of increased conflict, confusion, misunderstanding. And I have many of my um, friends and students who, they feel like they're clear on their intention. I'm here for compassion. I'm here to try to, become a more fully present human being for others and show up. And yet I feel overwhelmed. I feel drained, or I feel consumed by rage. All of these are completely reasonable responses, right? And Tenzin will talk more about anger after we hit on this topic for a while. But what's, interesting to think about is what are the ways that we can move through those feelings of overwhelm and despair or rage and anger or, some other variety. And it's not by trying to deny or force away those feelings. I think sometimes we have an assumption if our intention is clear and our practices are steady or even a bit irregular, but I'm here for it. I care about it. I want to be a compassionate person. Why can't I do it? And I think one of the most important messages I'd love to share with you all and that I enjoy sharing in general is that's the exact moment when the compassion needs to turn back towards ourselves. It is hard to feel compassionate. It is hard to move through despair and anger, especially if we feel, the injustice. Injustice is such a strong trigger for anger. That could be, again, a global injustice. Like, why are we letting people who are vulnerable be so susceptible to harms unnecessarily? That kind of injustice. But then we can also bring that injustice home, right? If we bring it into our personal lives, when we don't feel someone sees us or hears us accurately, there's a lot of anger, right? We can feel pretty frustrated. Such a common and sticky feeling to have when we're not appreciated or seen or understood in the way we want. And we may still, whether it's that global or personal context, have this desire, but I just want to feel compassion. I don't want to feel this anger. And so in that moment, if we can turn the compassion towards ourselves and recognize, it's hard for me to be with this. This matters to me and I care. All of us, or many of us here, I know there's so many trained teachers here, know that self-compassion is of benefit. And if you don't know it, here's a breaking headline: self-compassion is of benefit. It really matters. We really need it. There's no kind of skipping or shortcutting through it. There's no amount of compassion we extend to others that can actually take the place of really feeling and establishing that sense of internal worth, value, care, and not because, we did this or we did that, but just because as a human being, we are deserving of care and love. An interesting thing about any hope towards a universal or global compassion, which is our ideal, that's the world we want to live in. So we have to keep it in mind at all times to find our way there. Any hope of finding that world of universal compassion means that we really have to recognize ourselves as the same as others, and that all others are deserving of compassion just like us. And there's just such a beautiful interweaving when we really recognize this kind of core belief of compassion, which is all beings, every single one of them, whether they're doing so in ways that are just really confusing or harmful, they are trying to avoid suffering and find happiness. Like everyone wants that. Everyone is aiming towards that. And it's a wholesome and beautiful aspiration to be free from difficulty, struggle, and suffering. However, we get confused and we don't always move towards that goal or that aspiration clearly. But when we really have that core belief, everybody wants that. Everybody is moving towards that. It's almost like we have a natural sense of empathy and care. So it's really, hopefully sounds pretty simple, like, right, we all suffer. We're all deserving of care. So why aren't we living in a world filled with compassion? Why isn't that what we see all around us? Because I've been looking around. I don't see that as the world we live in. Um, and we can understand that some of the obstacles to compassion really are when our empathy gets blocked. That's a big one. So the relationship of compassion and empathy, it's a very important one, a very nuanced one. When we think of compassion, the maybe more traditional definition is the heart that feels squeezed when it meets suffering, that kind of squeezing of the heart, that, oh. And then in the more contemporary scientific definition, it's the aspiration to alleviate suffering when we see or encounter someone, someplace, something who's experiencing difficulty. So, so beautiful. But in neither of these definitions is there that core aspect of empathy, which is being able to bring together a sense of, I recognize the difficulty or challenge of another person, and then I'm taking a look around and understanding kind of what is the root of this difficulty? What's happening for this person? Empathy doesn't 100% ensure compassion. Very savvy, empathic people can use that skill and that quality to exploit others. Empathy is just recognizing there's a challenge and difficulty and understanding it. However, our empathy can lead us to the greatest compassion because we're not just recognizing their struggle and difficulty, we're recognizing in some ways the causes and conditions, the contributors to what might lead to this person being alleviated from that struggle or difficulty. So to bring it, we'll just bring it right on the ground here. Let's say an example. Anybody here know people, maybe you have a friend who's been in a bad relationship for a long time? Yeah. Yeah, it happens. Maybe one of us have been in a bad relationship for a long time before, right? And you call your friend and you say, God, I'm so heartbroken. I'm so sad. It's so hard. And, you as the friend, You have this empathy. Wow, I recognize their difficulty and struggle. But the empathy also allows us to look and see what's the true cause of their difficulty, right? Is it that they are continuing to engage in a situation that isn't helpful? Is it that they are overreacting to what's going on in the relationship? Is it that they just need more other activities so they focus less on this person? There could be so many different ways to understand and really recognize and take the perspective of this person. This is very different than us kind of merging with this distress of our friend. Like, oh God, I feel so overwhelmed. Like they're so unhappy in this relationship, but they want to make it work. That's an empathic distress, right? So that's when our empathy leads to distress. However, let's say as a savvy friend, I recognize, I've known this couple for a while. This is my dear friend. I think she's overreacting. And so with skill, we can actually act compassionately and say, maybe give it a little time. Maybe take a walk around the block or give yourself a half day and see how you feel about this argument. So that's like our clear seeing with empathy that allows us to act in compassion. Or we could do what sometimes our friends often want us to do, which is we could get on board and be like, yeah, they are terrible. Your partner, I can't believe they said that. They're the worst. They're making you feel this way. And this is when, our empathy actually turns into a kind of aversion or a blaming. We recognize the suffering, but we kind of like deflect it with that aggression. So I think it's really useful and important for us to kind of see and understand these facets of empathy. Empathy that can lead towards distress and overwhelm, like we get too caught up in it. Empathy that can lead to clear seeing and a real good application of our compassion. Empathy that can lead to frustration and anger. And, empathy is something we are actually kind of hardwired for, if you want to consider it in a evolutionary psychology point of view. We are head to toe capacitated to recognize the vocal tone, the facial signals, the words. We are really like noting through the mind and body what's happening. I just have to mention, I was at this really wild talk on AI, consciousness, and emotion on Thursday. And the idea that we can have empathy without a body just blows my mind. It's impossible. I just know it. I hate to be a scientist saying I know something with it without saying any humility, but I just don't think it's the same quality. Maybe it's a different thing. We can learn a lot by listening. And if any of you have been exploring with the chat bots, like they give pretty good advice. They can feel kind of caring. It's nice. It's very different than the embodied quality of recognizing what's happening to another person through all these multi-channels of emotion and expression. So I think it's such an interesting time actually to think about what makes us empathic, what makes us emotional. And it's a very interesting time in this country when there's a bit of a backlash in some arenas of our political sphere against empathy, as though it is actually the problem and it is overwhelming. So I feel like I've always felt as though I were a warrior of compassion. And now I feel also, in order to be empathic, I must be a warrior of empathy. So very happy to do so. And I wanted to now ask dear Tenzin to give some thoughts or comments on compassion before we move to talking about anger for a bit with you all.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting, Eve, when you were talking, I was thinking of the traditional kind of Buddhist presentation of what we sometimes call the four immeasurables, which are these kind of interrelated states, including loving kindness, compassion. And then there's empathetic joy too. Like we talk about empathy, and often we think about empathy in terms of a resonance with someone else's suffering, but it can also be a resonance with someone else's joy or any other emotional state too. And that tends to be kind of my favorite flavor of of these four states is, and it's seen as the antidote to jealousy and envy. So that's interesting to cultivate. Like when something good happens to someone or you see someone being joyful, is our natural reaction, oh, why isn't that happening to me? How come they get all the good stuff? Or can we cultivate that kind of resonant empathy that's joyful and reflects others' joy? So that came up. And also to mention that one of the dangers of compassion is we don't want it to be pity. We say in Buddhist framing, we say that's what we call the near enemy, or it's kind of the danger zone. It's not feeling sorry for someone else. So it really, like Eve said, depends so much on that empathic connection. Like we're not just saying, oh, you poor thing. I don't even know what that would be like, but I feel sorry for you. It's really like, I get you. Like I see what you're going through and I resonate with it and I understand it. So it has this affective, emotional resonance and also a cognitive piece of some kind of understanding. And then we often say those two things together are what are most likely to lead to true compassion instead of pity. It's the distancing of pity that doesn't really resonate with the emotional experience. And as Eve said, I 100% agree because it's so dependent on factors of our human body, like vocal tones, facial expression, body language, all of that. I don't think we can get a full empathic experience from a robot. I just don't think it's true, or AI, or Chat GPT, or any of these things. Not to be really old fashioned and resistant, but I think it's just true. So, yeah, yeah. Thank you.
And should we take questions now, or should we share a bit more on anger and then take questions at the end? What do you
Well, I
think?
could share maybe a couple of minutes because it sort of
Great.
relates, and then let's open it
Perfect.
up for questions.
Good.
And a couple of the things that Eve said about compassion, interestingly, made me think about anger. And just to share a little disclosure, and some of you, I've noticed some people online that were at my CEB teacher training in 2013 in Mexico with Eve. And I had been trained, I have been still, for many years in very traditional Buddhist uh, training. I was a monastic for 20 years. I met a lot of you back in my days when I was a Buddhist monastic. And I remember Eve, I think, was the first person who introduced me to this idea that anger can be constructive. And I had really absorbed this Buddhist idea, which I really kind of delved into, and I think it's due to some bad translations, that all anger is bad, terrible, destructive, harmful. And there's even a Buddhist text that was sometimes translated, even a moment of anger destroys eons of positive karma. And I'm like, oh my God, right? So I sort of was a little bit, steeped in this idea. So when Eve is like, anger has a function. She probably remembers I pushed back pretty hard because there we were. And then it's something that I had to just kind of work with in my own life for a while. And now I think I'm at the point of really seeing the gift of anger, because we say the function of anger is to remove an obstacle between you and getting your needs met. So seeing, as we say in the Cultivating Emotional Balance program, that all emotions have an important function. We wouldn't have evolved these emotions if they didn't have an important function. So anger arises when somehow there's an obstacle. You're not getting your needs met. There's something in between you and what you want, right? And so can we get the message of that and then get that important message and then somehow constructively deal with that, removing that obstacle? So obviously the destructive ways are attacking, blaming, externalizing, right? Saying, oh, it's that person's fault. I mean, especially interpersonally, like it's that person's fault. Or if it's a political figure, it's all their fault. They're terrible, they're awful. And then responding with anger and hatred directed towards someone. And that doesn't usually work to get our needs met anyway. Like if the goal is to get our needs met, usually that doesn't work. So what I've found is if I can use that feeling as a message, and for me, it's usually not the flavor of rage. Like anger is a whole spectrum of a family of emotions. And on one end is like, rage and belligerence. On one end is more like irritation, annoyance, right? So my flavor of anger is mostly that. So when I'm feeling just off and irritated and annoyed, I was just trying to ask myself, what isn't working out for me? What about my life isn't working? Like, what need is not getting met? Instead of projecting it onto, oh, it's all their fault, just go kind of take agency and go, like, what do I need right now? And then take responsibility for getting my needs met, right? And so I found that the best way for me when I get the message of anger, of managing it, is really sort of saying, can I ask somebody for what I need? Do I need to get better at asking others? Sometimes we're so bad at actually just expressing what we need and asking other people. And there's so many reasons for that. We've been let down so many times. We don't want to depend on anyone, because what if they let us down? You know, it's scary to actually make an ask, or we're afraid of their reaction. If we get better at that, and even better at just understanding what it is that we need and being okay with our needs. And that relates to what Eve was talking about, this self compassion that says, hey, yeah, I'm a human being. It's okay that I need this thing. And I might even be able to ask someone else for it in a way that's not demanding, but might maximize my, chances of getting my needs met. And then accepting care from others. Sometimes we get into this loop of, needing something, needing connection. We're so frustrated, we're irritated that we're not feeling connection. But even when other people reach out to us, we have an obstacle of accepting care from others. So part of self compassion, I think, is like community care, reaching out to others and letting others reach out to us too. Because sometimes, like I said, we have this whole story of independence. We don't want to be, dependent on others. And so we're left in this sort of frustrated, isolated bubble. And that also is not the way that we were meant to live as humans. So I find, with that emotion of anger, as I've now sort of changed my relationship with it over the last 13 years since Eve taught me that it can be constructive, really finding that there are ways that I can use that message and take agency and create what I need for my life. Another thing, and Eve mentioned this too, that I think is a beautiful sort of way of reframing anger. If we're angry about something happening in the world, if we're angry about injustice, that means we value justice. If we're angry about the way people aren't being cared for, it means that we value compassion. I volunteer here in Santa Cruz for a local food bank that just lost all of their funding from the US government. So they lost like 1/3 of their funding, and they're having a lot of trouble getting enough food to feed the people that need food. It's really upsetting. If I care about that, I care about people being fed. So one way we can use anger too is pointing to what are our core values, right? Because if we're angry about something that's happening, look at what we value. And that's a way of kind of savoring our own core values and using our responses. So, anger, we can reframe. The destructive anger is acting out, blaming another, attacking another, thinking it's all their fault. But if we can use it as that message to turn inward, to attune to what we need, to validate that it's okay for us to have needs with self compassion, and then to get even more clear about what we value in the world, and fight the harmful action, but not the person, right? So always when our anger, not directing it towards the person, but standing up strongly, using that energy of anger to stand up against injustice. So we can channel all of that energy into fighting systems and fighting the actions of others that are harmful, but always keeping compassion in our hearts towards everyone without exception, which is a huge ask, but that's part of our journey. So those are just some thoughts about anger, and especially even the relationship between anger and compassion and self-compassion. Thank you.
Thank you, Tenzin. Yeah, I think another piece that's been coming up a lot is I feel, we this idea that we individually have emotions is true. However, it seems undeniably clear that we collectively experience
Yeah.
emotions as well.
Yeah.
So this idea of kind of a shared or collective nervous system. And when there is a lot of um, immediate conflict going on in the world or difficulty, or like we can kind of almost, we pick up or sense the emotions of those going on around us. And I've noticed that there's a pretty high vibration of irritation going
Mm.
around these days.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's truly like, yeah, what's not getting met? I'm frustrated by this. But also, anger can sometimes, mask or compensate for our feelings of hopelessness and helplessness.
Mm. Yeah.
So they're, to really look clearly at our anger and see what also, is there. Like, I love that you said, I'm angry at injustice because I value justice. And then there might be one more, layer there is for me of, I'm so sad I don't live in a world in which there is justice.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And when we sit with the sadness that may, not always, may be with our anger, there's a way to kind of metabolize and integrate. Anger gives us no peace. If we
Right.
perpetuate our feelings of anger, we are just perpetuating a feeling of overwhelm. And again, there's no problem, as Tenzin beautifully said, no problem with anger. It's that like getting hooked and ruminating because we
Mm.
think we're right. I can't believe they did. I still can't. Oh my, just where Tenzin could have gone with the food bank realization that, wow, now we don't have enough food to feed people. Like, what are those bozos thinking? We could go on and on. And there's something we have to be kind of honest with ourselves about, that anger can feel energizing,
Mm. Mm.
even though it actually
Yeah.
is depleting. And so to, catch ourselves not letting in the background just this kind of fuming rumination and instead sit with it, see it clearly, bring compassion to what's needed.
Yeah.
And, it's funny because talking with friends, of course, that's what we want to do when we feel angry or upset, and just to be, very skillful, because we can just fan the flames with our friends. We can just make that anger stronger and bigger and just deplete the hell out of ourselves.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. And I think what you say is so true. And this idea that often anger is the go-to when we're feeling some kind of vulnerability, like fear or sadness or hurt feelings, because we don't want to sit with those feelings. And like you say, anger is energizing and it's a way to kind of mask or like, you know, kind of go from that vulnerability or even hide that sense of vulnerability from ourselves. Like if we stay active and out there, we won't be able to feel, like you say, that
yeah,
extreme sadness. If I live in an unjust world and I live in a place where people aren't being fed, and that just makes me deeply sad. So anger is a way of hiding that from myself or just not having to sit with that discomfort of that vulnerability of sadness. Yeah.
mm.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at our time, yeah, it'd be great to have a couple questions, and then we're going to talk a little bit about cultivating emotional balance teacher training upcoming. And we will hear from Mitsuli, who's here with us, about that training as well, who'll be one of our primary teachers. But yeah, I would love, oh, I see already Martin was at the ready with a question here. How can compassion be part of a balanced way of expressing anger? And I think, yeah, go ahead, Tenzin, if you'd like. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think pointing, like looking at the function of anger to point us towards an obstacle. And then can we compassionately deal with removing the obstacle? I think that's sort of the key for me in terms of what's the difference between destructive and constructive anger in action is okay, I see that there's some sort of an obstacle. It may be somebody else's behavior, it may be something I'm imposing on myself. So, both with self compassion and other compassion, like using compassion as the sort of test of are you removing the obstacle constructively? Like, is it showing compassion both for you and the other person, or is it just attacking and trying to get rid of it in a way that's not compassionate? That's what comes up for me, Martin.
Beautiful. Other questions or comments from folks? You can raise your hand, you can put them in the chat.
Really, you guys? Come on, don't be shy. We're here. We're here for you.
Yes, Lisa.
Hi. Well,
Ah,
Hi.
which emotion do you think is the worst enemy of compassion?
Ooh. I bet you
ooh.
have an idea too. I
Well,
mean,
for me, I think that is anger, but
mm,
sometimes can be fear. Yeah. And well, when fear, guilt may be together and preventing someone to feel especially self-compassion, I think.
mm. Yeah, I think any can block. I guess my first one would be disgust, and then maybe contempt also, because it's so dehumanizing, that feeling of disgust. There's, the research with the Gottmans, John and Julie Gottman, who've been looking at couples and their facial expression and their emotions for decades. And they find that the marriage is truly over when instead of being angry at one another, you have contempt or disgust for one another. Because it's like with anger, it's like, I expect more of you. And with disgust, it's like, of course you would do that. Just this blame. That's a great question. What do you think,
I,
Tenzin?
I would go for shame because I think shame is so self-focused. It's really hard to feel empathy or compassion when you're in the midst of a shame spiral. That's what popped into mind, Elisa, when you said, I mean, all of the other ones that Eve mentioned, but I'm just kind of thinking of like when you're really stuck in shame, it's so all about you, really, really hard to extend empathy or compassion to anyone else. What do you think, Eve? We have this ongoing shame debate conversation.
It really is. It's a pretty toxic, draining feeling. It's very, yeah, and very much hard to feel self-compassion for sure. Yeah, yeah. I saw a question from Gabriel. How do you spot spiritual bypassing? Gosh, that'd be a good title for a book, or a podcast. In yourself or in others, I guess would be, in yourself, it's
In
when
myself,
you're
yeah.
actually in yourself. Then I think that's a really good question, because I think it is when we are using our spiritual practice like an analgesic to avoid difficult emotions and difficult relationships. I know that the original, so John Wellwood coined that term, and my teacher is Jennifer Wellwood, his longtime partner, and he was talking a lot about the way that people were behaving in the 70s, which was a little different than how it is, kind of manifesting now. In the 70s, when his teacher was Chogyam Trungpa, so people would drop out of their life entirely and avoid all the trappings of the world and anything that would be required of them as a kind of,
Mm.
you know, participatory person in society and culture. And now I think we see it used as like a way to kind of justify this false equanimity or aloofness, and we can sometimes use compassion to do that too, right? Like, oh God, I'm just overwhelmed by my anger towards my brother all these years. And I'll just have compassion for myself because it's so hard. And it's like, yeah, and what is that anger? What's your role in that anger? What's your view? So you're not doing the work of actually unpacking, the root causes of these difficult emotions. And you're kind of like prematurely transcending through spiritual practice this needed place of being relationally attuned with those in the world, which doesn't mean letting everybody in. You could still have difficulty with your brother, not speak with them and not see them, but you can have a stance of compassion. Um, Great question. Any follow-up on that, Gabriel?
Yeah, I feel it's a massive trap and really hard to
Yeah.
spot personally. I think it's one of the things where you need somebody from outside, actually like a trusted friend to sometimes say and
Yeah.
spot it. And I think it's very, very important, especially with like more practice. It's very easy to slip into it. So
Yeah. CEB will help.
yeah, sure.
It's true, because like you're kind of facing all your emotions and like
Yeah.
really taken into account.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely also feel that I do struggle with this unpacking of emotions because I feel that if I dig in an emotion, if I start to think about an emotion, I will create the emotion. I can convince myself there is an issue to be solved. And it's like self-fulfilling prophecy. And yeah, there is a fine line between letting go and digging, I feel. And
Mhm.
digging doesn't always, in my observation, lead to a good result.
Yeah.
For me,
You gotta have
that's the example
good
of people
tools.
doing eternal therapies, where you just can
Yes.
dig more and more and more and more, and you convince yourself that you need that. So it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's very
You're describing approach to emotion where you reify the self. And I think the approach in CEB is like all emotions are universal and shared. And like it's not, it's very personal, but it's also so temporary. So I agree, you can get so fixated on your own wounding that you can't move forward. But that's why I think the balance with spiritual practice can help. So I
mhm.
think you're onto it. You're onto it. Yeah. Thank you. So maybe, Tenzin, we talk a little bit about cultivating emotional balance teacher training here.
Yeah, that
So
sounds good. And see, because there might be some questions from the folks about that too.
yeah, so the way that we teach this teacher training is there are 2 week-long retreats a year apart, and then there is monthly online webinars in between. There's small group work, there's meditation practice. Um, it's a quite rich course in terms of content and then the ways of learning too. We've been really lucky to kind of improve and shift and change the pedagogy of it over these last, especially 3 or 4 years. Um, it's going to be held in Mexico. It was in Mexico in 2013, but that's when it was in its old format of 5 weeks, what I like to call our catch and release model, where we just brought you in and then you just go out and on your own. Good luck. We found that this model of 1 week, then a lot more integration, and 1 week works a lot better. We have a lot more people teaching the material, a lot more comfort in people with the material, and I think it's a great way. And we've historically had a lot of people with significant background either in Buddhist practice or in psychology or just general interest. Um, it's not a psychotherapeutic program, it's an educational training, people teaching it in healthcare systems, educational systems, as small group work in coaching context. I mean, there's many teachers here on the call who use it in many different ways. And, the content is very rich. It's a 42-hour curriculum, so it takes quite a lot to learn the basic material. And so having those months of practicing the material and also really developing the meditations and the skill and feeling confident in guiding meditations, if that's not something that's already familiar. Alan Wallace, who's a very accomplished author, translator, teacher, he created the contemplative component of our training. And then my dad, Paul Ekman, and myself created the emotional skills side based on our universal understanding of emotions and really looking at each emotion and the anatomy of each emotion with some depth and using this emotion episode timeline to move through each emotion in a structured way and to kind of not get into that over digging, as Gabriel was saying, of like getting kind of lost in it, just looking at each one, recognizing it, and then working in small groups to reflect and really feel that sense of kind of shared humanity with these emotions too. Yeah, I don't know. What else, Tenzin? What should I mention?
Yeah, and I was going to say this next iteration is, as Eve mentioned, it includes also a lot of sort of pedagogical training, like training in how to be a teacher and practice sessions, as she mentioned. And one of the things in the old one that some of you have done, there wasn't really a lot of training in how to be a teacher. So we found that a lot of the graduates, that if they were already a teacher, felt comfortable teaching, then they would teach it. But if they weren't, they wouldn't. So we're also, trying to get people up with some of the pedagogical skills. So don't feel shy if you're not already a teacher. We'll have training on that piece by our colleague Lonnie, who's worked in education her whole teaching career and has really put together a beautiful piece. And there's some recommended readings. So not to feel reluctant to do it if you're not already a teacher. And also that we put together small groups for practice. And as you've said, practicing guiding meditation. So also don't feel shy if you're not a meditation teacher. We'll have that part of the teaching as well. And so yeah, we really tried, like you've said a couple of years ago, to make it just more accessible for everyone, and kind of a deeper, richer program over a longer period of time, so people would have time also for their own work through the skills, because it's a teacher training. But a couple of people mentioned after doing it, they felt like they did the whole teacher training. They never intended to teach it, just as a year-long CEB retreat almost, to really deepen their own kind of experience with all of the techniques and the methods and the meditation. So that's an option as well. You don't have to sign any kind of contract with us that you'll teach CEB. You can do it for your own education as well.
And Latsuli, it would be wonderful to have you say hi, introduce yourself, anything you want to share about the preparations for this year.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Latsuli. I'm from Mexico. I'm here in Mexico right now, so shiny here. And I took CEB on 2018, I think. And I was teaching since then here in Mexico in different contexts, mainly corporate context, schools and open public context too. I have a PhD. I work with indigenous groups here in Mexico. My PhD is in interdisciplinary social research. My main topic, which I'm interested to working with indigenous groups, is their notion, their perception of interdependence. Like we are all interrelated and connected with Earth, and we are all Earth, especially as a trigger to work together for the common good. So it has been so beautiful to do my research with a group of indigenous women here in Mexico. And it has been so amazing how it's related with all the practices that we have. It has been so interesting how indigenous studies, and I was in San Francisco a few days ago in a retreat that they are trying to bring all those topics together, the Buddhist teaching and the indigenous studies. So it's so beautiful. And yeah, I'm so glad to be part of this teaching core. And yeah, thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Latsuli. Yeah, your research is such an inspiration, and CEB really upholds the tradition of contemplative science, and you're so deeply interwoven with that. And we have also Lobsang Michael Tenpa, who is teaching a retreat, so sadly not with us today, who will be part of the teaching team, but some of you know him well. Incredible teacher, has spent many years of his life dedicated to really understanding Buddhist practices and translating them in a way that is accessible for every day. But his heart of practice is so wonderful. I'm sure if you don't know him, you will love him. And yeah, so other things to bring up. I know we also have some core members of our team here, Edgar and Tom. Anything you think we should say about the training people should know? It's in a beautiful location, right, Edgar? It's like somewhere, lovely retreat center.
Yes, it's a retreat center in El Oro, Mexico, and it's 2 hours and a half away from Mexico City. So we will arrange everything. There will be individual cabins where you can stay with a private bathroom, and there will also be shared spaces. It's surrounded by nature. It's very, very conducive for reflection, and it has a very nice harmony to itself.
Beautiful. And then maybe we could put the link of where people could apply, just so they have it here if they want.
Sure,
I'll copy it in
send
the chat.
Thanks,
I'll grab
Tom.
it, copy it in the chat.
And yeah, any other questions about the TT? Any
There is
other
a question in the chat about the structure of the week-long retreat, like what happens during the week-long retreat. So do you want to?
Tenzin?
Okay, so
I'm happy
the
to
week,
go, Bob.
and one thing that's important to mention, taking the 42-hour CEB course is a prerequisite for the teacher training. And there are a couple of different options to do that before the teacher training begins. And that's something we changed recently too, because we found that a lot of people would come to the teacher training without knowing what the program was. And then we had to spend a lot of time getting people kind of with the basic concepts. So we're requiring that ahead of time. And then during the first week, it's kind of a deeper dive into the concepts, into the meditation. So the day is split between meditation sessions where we have an opportunity to actually kind of deepen our practice and understanding of the contemplative side and the meditation practices that go along with the program, and more of an understanding of the emotional side and the ideas about emotions. We go into, I mean, the metaphor I always think of is like, to teach kindergarten, you had to have gone all the way through college and do teacher training. So we teach more in the teacher training than you probably ever really have to do when you're teaching CEB itself, because we want you to have even a deeper understanding. And then if questions come up from the students, so there's plenty of time for that. And also often, there's some sort of movement involved. If there's somebody who's a yoga teacher, they might do like morning sessions of yoga, and plenty of time to get to know each other as a cohort and interact and so forth. What to add, Eve?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've built a pretty beautiful combination between the inner reflection that's needed. We have to have that introspection time, that retreat time, and then learning, and then discussion. Yeah, I delight in our teacher trainings. It's such a highlight for me to see everybody start to really take on the material and learn. The group-based learning reflects the group-based training model. So it really, yes, there are teachers and they are supporting you, but really a lot of the learning happens with each other, which is great.
Oh, yes. As a correction, Tom says the CEB prerequisite is 12 hours. Yeah, no, that's right. It's not the 42-hour training. It's the 12-hour. And there was a question of when is that being given? And I know that Eve and Ryan Redman, our colleague, and I will be doing a short course hybrid. It's in San Francisco in July 25th through 26th. 26th.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And but that will be hybrid too. And we might be able to share links somehow. Are we able to do that? Oh yeah, here's another one. I think we're getting links shared. So one of the and then the self-paced one, the Wisdom has a online self-paced course that Edgar just shared. Yeah. Do we have is there a way we could have the prerequisites on the registration page for the CEBTT?
Good idea.
Like have links for all the options added to that page? That might be convenient for folks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
We will.
What's that, Edgar?
Oh no, Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, we can definitely add that. If we have a collection of links, we can definitely have that added to the website. So it's just very easy to find that right
Yeah,
on.
let's do that because that would be convenient, and then people just have to go to one place for all the information.
And Tom, do you want to say hi before we end, just so folks know who you are?
Hi, everyone. I am also a CEB teacher. I was in the last cohort. I work very closely with Tenzin and Eve and Lonnie and Edgar and Tempa and Litsuli. We're working really hard to really make sure this next iteration of teacher training goes well. And like Eve said, we're just, try to keep everything that works working and see if we can just like get a little bit better each time from that perspective. I will be present on the first retreat, sort of as like a floating assistant TA kind of helping. That way, our wonderful main primary teachers can focus on being their great teacher selves. And then I will also be providing assistance to the small groups in some capacity from a monthly perspective. As was mentioned as part of the curriculum, smaller groups meet on a monthly basis. We sort of rotate through with people trading off, sort of practicing leading meditation, having a chance for us to be able to ask questions. So I'll be participating in that as well. So yeah, it's great to be able to see everyone and say hi.
Thank you, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I know we're at the end of our time here. I want to be respectful. It took me 2.5 minutes to find the Zoom link, but folks might need to hop off. And yeah, just thank you to everyone who's here. Thank you to everyone who's teaching CEB. It is just unbelievable delight. Elisa, who spoke earlier, has been teaching CEB teachers for years and years, and it just, it brings me so much joy to know that these teachings and these ideas are making their way through the world and in your hearts, and may it be of great benefit. Thank you, Tenzin.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks,
you,
Eve, and
everyone.
thanks everybody for coming to our session. And yeah, if you have more questions, there will be the link on the CEB website, and you'll be able to get more information there, including the prerequisites. So thank you. Take care, everybody. Stay safe. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you all.
Thank you.